say that it doesn't matter who you are, whether you are the president, in whatever office you hold, accountability must be affected and justice will be met. Now, we continue to fight that no legal fees must be paid for Mr. Zuma, and that we must make sure that when Mr. Schabir Shaik was prosecuted, Mr. Zuma should have also been prosecuted. And we welcome the fact that he must today have his day in court, and I would hope one day, when the conviction goes through, we will make sure accountability is met for Jacob Zuma. We'll see him in orange overalls.
Do you feel vindicated that you've been pursuing this matter now for the past 9 years? Finally, he has his day in court.
It shows you why it's important to have a DA. Because the DA has been hard at work. It's been an expensive court case for us. It's taken us days to be able to fight and years to fight this battle, but we feel deeply vindicated. It was right for people like Helen Zille to say we'll take this decision. It was right that the party continued to fight, and now I will continue the fight to make sure that Jacob Zuma has his day in court and accountability is effected.
Mmusi, how much of a struggle do you expect it to be? I mean, there's been something of a Stalingrad approach in terms of what the former president has done in litigating, and already we're talking about an organization in Cape Town already having filed for a permanent stay of prosecution. Are you ready for that?
We are ready and will certainly oppose that view. Mr. Zuma has been found by the North Gauteng High Court in the state of capture report to be a delinquent litigator. And I think there's lesson now that if he wants to continue on multiple litigation, he has to finance it himself, and he has to make sure that he exercises his legal recourse, but we will not shy away. We will continue to fight. We are ready for the battle. It's taken us 10 years to get here until we get a conviction against Jacob Zuma. And if you can remember, in the judgment that was put against Schabir Shaik, the judge in fact said there was enough compelling evidence against Schabir Shaik and there was enough against Jacob Zuma for him to have been prosecuted alongside. Therefore, we will not shy away. He should also be prosecuted and must face the same consequences.
Do you foresee political dividend from this? In that, do you foresee a situation where South Africans give you the credit you deserve for pursuing this matter, particularly at the point at which the charges have been dropped based on the so-called spy tapes? Or is your view that South Africans will basically let this pass and just be happy that this justice is being pursued?
South Africans must realize that unless the NPA does its job without fear of prosecution, without fear of prejudice, it will ultimately be, we must make sure anybody, any president will always be held to account. That's why today is not just a victory against Jacob Zuma. It's a victory for our judicial services. It's a victory for the effectiveness of the DA. But ultimately, it's a victory to say it doesn't matter who you are, we will hold you to account. And we should never, ever relent in that work. And I would hope South Africans recognize the fact that when you have an effective opposition, it will work continuously. And we want to make sure that even whoever the next head of the NPA becomes, that head of the NPA is appointed through Parliament, and that no person, regardless of what level of office they are, is ever allowed to continue wasting taxpayers' money and avoid criminal action without any accountability. That's why we welcome the decision, and we will continue our work in making sure that Mr. Ramaphosa does not pay for Mr. Zuma's legal fees.
Just to ask you on the matter of Patricia de Lille, she's one of the complainants in this issue. She was contacted about 3 months ago by the NPA. But you yourself, in an internal dispute of the DA, she does cite this court case of former President Jacob Zuma, that your prosecution of her within the DA is doubting her credibility to fight corruption for this case.
No, what we mustn't do is mixed up issues. Everybody must account. Just like today, Jacob Zuma must account. If there is a case against Ms. de Lille, she must also account. All of us.
Mr. Zuma must have his day in court. You got that, of course, except for the trial where you'll have his day in court. Now that you're mentioning that Schabir Shaik was convicted, he was sentenced, is that exactly what you guys are expecting, that he should be ultimately perhaps also sentenced successfully?
Anybody who acts in a criminal manner is equal before the law. That's why we have a constitution. It's not because you are the president that you must get special treatment. Anybody. In fact, this case began when Jacob Zuma was MEC in KZN, not when he was president. That's why we want him to pay personally. So the ultimate objective is that if Mr. Zuma is found guilty, he must also face the same consequences of the law, for he's an ordinary citizen like anybody. None of us must have differential treatment on the basis of where we are. Otherwise, the law is subjective, not objective. We would want, ultimately, all of us be treated with equality before the law. That is the first principle, and Jacob Zuma is no different.
Are there any plans from the NPA side to continue scrutinizing the developments around this case, especially with the prosecution team that has been appointed? What exactly is your plan around it to make sure that fairness prevails in this matter?
From the DA, we will keep this matter and we'll hold, we'll keep an oversight on the process, because already I don't want to get into the prosecutor that's been allocated to the matter. Don't want to get into what happens in KZN. Today we must celebrate that we are a step closer for Jacob Zuma to get to court. Next up, we will obviously be opposing this whole action about a permanent stay, and we want to ensure that ultimately Jacob Zuma faces a criminal trial. What we want is a speedy resolution on this matter. We can't wait for much longer. It's dragged on for too long. We want to make sure the evidence is laid well, and if you depend on the last judgment that was against Shabir Sheikh, it was clear that there was compelling evidence to convict Jacob Zuma. That's why we can't stop now. Let us go.
Names that might pop up, prominent names, except for a Sheikh and of course the former head of
On this matter of the arms deal, I'm sure the ANC and other members will not be exempt. Let them all come out and let us ensure that prosecution takes place. And anybody who has broken the law must also come to account before the people of South Africa.
Do you feel a degree of personal satisfaction? 2015, when you were elected, I remember you said, Mr. Zuma, you will have your day in court. Look at you smiling.
I am.
A degree of personal satisfaction.
I am absolutely delighted, because we can't, when you are in opposition, you don't flip-flop on your position. You say, if you stood out and you say, we will fight this cause for however long it wants. I'm so grateful that Jacob Zuma will have what he's always wanted, his day in court. And now what I'm saying to him is that even in court, we will make sure that the conviction takes place, that accountability is effected.
Mr. Maimane, I don't apologize if the question's been asked, but you've always viewed, the DA seems to have viewed Sean Abrams consistently as a puppet and Sean the sheep. Does this decision that he's made change your perceptions on him, or do you still believe he's not the right person to be leading the NPA?
I think there's a flaw in how the head of the NPA is appointed. The flaw is that Section 167 gives the president at least the power to appoint, but it doesn't stop the president from coming to Parliament and saying, here are the candidates that I'm considering, can we get transparency? So my views on Mr. Abrams remain the same, because I think he's been set up in a system that simply does not work. What we want in the long run is that we must get to a point where the head of the National Prosecuting Authority is appointed through a parliamentary process, and then we can satisfy ourselves as South Africans that the person we choose is not a loyal of the president, is a person who will in fact do the job.
But is he still a sheep, in your view?
Well, at least now that the courts have compelled him, because you can remember the charges already stood. That was our argument consistently. He had no other choice. He's been led. And now I'm glad that the DA has finally led him to find his common sense.
It's very evident that the president's going to bring former president's going to bring a number of legal challenges to the racketeering, to the permanent stay, possibly a review, and this is all going to be funded by taxpayers. I mean, is there not room for a legal challenge to that? As
you know, we've opened our case. Certainly we've given this, the South African government, we're asking Mr. Ramaphosa, firstly, to make public the agreement to pay for legal fees for Mr. Zuma in eternity, it would seem. So we want that agreement. We've requested of him to stop it immediately, because we simply can't be paying for more legal fees. And also because this matter was in Mr. Zuma in his private capacity. The case was not against Democratic Alliance versus the presidency. It was Democratic Alliance versus J.G. Zuma. Therefore, J.G. Zuma must pay in his personal capacity. And ultimately, we have asked Mr. Ramaphosa to help us recoup the money. And by Wednesday, if he doesn't get back to us, I will also see Mr. Ramaphosa in court to make sure that he stops paying for what the High Court has already described as someone who's a wasteful litigant We must stop paying for Mr. Zuma, and he must pay in his personal capacity, and we must recoup back the money.